Somewhere in a hospital, a doctor is staring at a set of test results with the particular expression that medical professionals develop after years of training. The carefully composed, professionally neutral look that is specifically designed to conceal the fact that they have absolutely no idea what they are looking at. The patient in front of them has symptoms that don't match any textbook. The blood work is anomalous in ways that are difficult to categorize. The imaging results are producing hallway conversations that start with, "You need to come see this," and end with a room full of confused specialists. The patient has been through this before. Many times. Years of appointments, years of tests, years of being told their results are unusual or atypical or the one that never gets less frustrating. Interesting. They've been misdiagnosed. They've been told it's probably stress. They've been referred to specialists, who referred them to other specialists, who referred them back to the original specialist with a polite note explaining that this case is outside their area of expertise. They have a folder at home, a physical folder, the kind with tabs, containing years of medical documentation and not a single satisfying answer. And then, after years of searching, someone finally puts a name to it, a name most people in the room have never heard before. A name so rare that there are only a handful of confirmed cases in the entire world. A name that, paradoxically, brings an enormous wave of relief, because at minimum, the thing finally has a name, and simultaneously brings the terrifying secondary realization that because so few people have this condition, almost no one has studied it in depth, treatment options are essentially experimental, and the global community of medical experts who specialize in it could probably fit comfortably in a moderately sized conference room. This is the reality of ultra-rare disease. And today we're going down a rabbit hole that goes far deeper, far stranger, and far more fascinating than most people expect, because the question of what counts as the rarest disease in the world opens up into a much larger conversation about how medicine works, how the human body can malfunction in ways that defy categorization, and what it means to be, statistically speaking, almost entirely alone in your diagnosis. Before getting into specific conditions, the word rare needs some unpacking, because in medical terminology it carries a formal definition that most people don't know about. In the United States, a disease is classified as rare if it affects fewer than 200,000 people nationwide. In Europe, the threshold is even tighter, fewer than 1 in 2,000 people. These definitions exist primarily for regulatory reasons, because drugs developed to treat rare conditions have a smaller potential market and therefore require different economic incentives to make pharmaceutical investment worthwhile. This is why rare disease medications are sometimes called orphan drugs. They're treatments for conditions that the pharmaceutical industry might otherwise orphan, leaving them without commercial development. Under these definitions, there are approximately 7,000 to 10,000 known rare diseases, collectively affecting somewhere between 300 million and 400 million people worldwide, which is a number that might initially seem contradictory. How can rare diseases collectively affect hundreds of millions of people? The answer is that the rarity of each individual condition doesn't prevent the aggregate category from being substantial. Rare diseases as a group are, paradoxically, quite common. About 1 in 17 people will be affected by some rare condition at some point in their lives. But within that already rare category, there exists a further tier. Conditions so extraordinarily uncommon that even specialists in rare disease might never encounter a single case in their careers. Conditions with single-digit confirmed diagnoses worldwide. Conditions where the total known patient population could share a meal at a small restaurant. These are the ultra-rare diseases, and this is where things get genuinely extraordinary. One of the most frequently cited candidates for the title of world's rarest disease is a condition called ribose 5-phosphate isomerase deficiency. There is a reason you've probably never heard of it, and that reason is stark. As of the most recent available information, fewer than a handful of cases have ever been confirmed in medical literature. Some accounts suggest as few as 1 or 2. The condition involves a defect in an enzyme called ribose 5-phosphate isomerase, which plays a role in a metabolic pathway called the pentose phosphate pathway, a biochemical process involved in producing certain molecules the body requires for normal cellular function. When this enzyme doesn't work properly, specific substances accumulate in the brain, causing progressive neurological damage. Symptoms include developmental delay, seizures, and a gradual deterioration of neurological function. The reason so few cases have been identified isn't simply that the condition is extraordinarily uncommon, though it almost certainly is. It's also that diagnosing it requires a very particular kind of investigation that most standard medical workups don't include. The metabolic signature of the disease is detectable through specialized analysis of brain tissue or cerebrospinal fluid, but only if someone already suspects a metabolic disorder of this particular type and orders the right tests. Conditions this rare exist in a diagnostic shadow. They're so uncommon that they aren't on most clinicians' radar, and because they're not on the radar, cases that do occur may be attributed to other causes or simply remain unresolved. This is one of the great paradoxes of ultra-rare disease. The rarer a condition is, the less likely it is to be correctly identified, which means case counts may systematically underestimate true prevalence. There could be people walking around right now with ribose 5-phosphate isomerase deficiency who have received wrong diagnoses, or who have been filed under the vast and unsatisfying category of cause unknown. Then there is a condition called Field's disease, named after two sisters, Catherine and Kirsty Fields, who were diagnosed with it in Wales. At the time of their diagnosis, they were believed to be the only two people in the world with the condition. The disease affects the neuromuscular system, causing progressive muscle deterioration, and the fact that it was identified in two sisters points to a genetic origin. Though the precise molecular mechanism remained, for years, poorly understood precisely because there were only two known patients to study. This raises a genuinely uncomfortable question about how medical knowledge works. Understanding a disease requires studying patients with that disease. Studying patients requires having enough of them to draw statistically meaningful conclusions. But if only two people in the world have your condition, meaningful population studies are impossible. You can observe, you can hypothesize, you can run tests, but the sample size is so small that every finding comes with enormous uncertainty. Field's disease is a medical mystery encased in a statistical impossibility, and the sisters at the center of it have navigated a healthcare system that was, through no fault of anyone involved, structurally unprepared to help them. Another condition worth examining is called Hutchinson-Gilford progeria syndrome. You may have heard of progeria because it receives more public attention than most ultra-rare conditions, partly because its effects are so dramatic and so heartbreaking. Progeria causes accelerated aging in children, with children affected by the syndrome displaying physical characteristics of advanced aging. Hair loss, aged skin, cardiovascular disease, joint abnormalities, while still in childhood or early adolescence. The condition is caused by a mutation in the LMNA gene, which provides instructions for producing a protein called lemon A. The faulty version of this protein, nicknamed progerin, destabilizes cell nuclei and accelerates cellular aging, in ways that researchers are still working to fully understand. Progeria affects roughly 1 in every 20 million births, with only a few hundred cases ever confirmed worldwide at any given time. The life expectancy of children with progeria is heartbreakingly short. The average age of death is around 14 years, most commonly from heart disease, because the accelerated aging process affects the cardiovascular system with particular severity. What makes progeria significant beyond its rarity is what it has taught researchers about normal aging. The progerin protein that causes accelerated aging in progeria patients is also produced in very small amounts in healthy individuals as they age naturally. And the accumulation of progerin over time may contribute to aspects of normal human aging. Research into progeria has therefore generated insights into cardiovascular aging and cellular senescence that extend far beyond the small patient population directly affected. This is a recurring theme in rare disease research. Conditions affecting tiny numbers of people occasionally illuminate biological mechanisms of enormous general relevance. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. what they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more, plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. There is a category of rare disease that deserves particular attention because of how fundamentally it challenges the way most people think about human experience. These are conditions that don't simply cause physical suffering, but alter the basic perceptual or cognitive architecture of being a person. Consider the condition known as congenital analgesia, the complete inability to feel physical pain. This might sound at first like a superpower, and in the cultural imagination, it frequently gets framed that way. What wouldn't you give to never feel pain again? Here is what you would give: a significant portion of your life expectancy, and possibly your life itself. Pain is not an inconvenience. Pain is a biological alarm system of extraordinary sophistication, evolved over hundreds of millions of years to warn organisms that tissue damage is occurring and that behavioral correction is urgently required. People with congenital analgesia have no alarm system. They don't know when they've broken a bone, bitten through their tongue, developed appendicitis, or sustained an injury that is actively destroying internal tissue. Children with the condition frequently damage their joints and skeletal structures severely. Not from any external violence, but simply from ordinary physical activity that generates forces their bodies absorb without complaint. They chew their tongues and lips without realizing it. They develop infections from wounds they didn't notice. They walk on broken ankles. The condition is caused by mutations in genes involved in pain signal transmission, most frequently the SCN9A gene, which encodes a sodium channel critical for pain signaling in peripheral sensory neurons. It's extraordinarily uncommon, with only a small number of confirmed cases worldwide, and the people who have it do not consider themselves superhuman. They consider themselves, very reasonably, people managing a serious and dangerous medical condition that requires constant vigilance precisely because their body provides none. Moving further into the territory of conditions that reshape human perception entirely, there is a phenomenon called Urbach-Wiethe disease, a condition affecting the amygdala, the brain structure centrally involved in processing fear and emotional responses. Urbach-Wiethe disease causes calcification and gradual deterioration of the amygdala, and one of its most remarkable documented effects is the apparent elimination of the subjective experience of fear. People with the condition don't feel afraid in situations that would produce intense fear in anyone else. Researchers have exposed patients with Urbach-Wiethe disease to haunted houses, horror films, and scenarios designed to trigger threat responses in normal subjects, and those patients reported finding these experiences mildly interesting at most. They intellectually understood that a situation was potentially dangerous without experiencing the visceral emotional response that normally accompanies danger. The condition is so rare, with only a couple of hundred cases confirmed worldwide, concentrated particularly in a small community in South Africa due to a founder effect, that most people have never encountered it. But the scientific literature it has generated is remarkable, because studying people without fear has illuminated the amygdala's role in emotional processing with a precision that would be impossible to achieve any other way. There is something philosophically vertiginous about this. Fear is so foundational to human experience, so deeply woven into how we perceive risk, make decisions, form relationships, and navigate the world, that its absence doesn't simply change a person's emotional life. It changes in subtle and profound ways their entire relationship to reality. The world looks different without fear, differently dangerous, differently textured, differently navigable. Urbach-Wiethe patients aren't fearless in the Hollywood sense of being brave under pressure. They are simply neurologically operating without a module that everyone else takes entirely for granted. There is also a condition called foreign accent syndrome, one of those diagnoses that sounds, when described, like something out of a poorly researched thriller novel, but is, in fact, a real and documented neurological phenomenon. Foreign accent syndrome occurs when brain damage, most commonly from stroke, though also from traumatic brain injury, multiple sclerosis, or other neurological events, causes a person's speech patterns to shift in ways that listeners perceive as a foreign accent. This is not the person suddenly speaking a different language. It's not a psychological response to trauma. The motor patterns controlling speech production are disrupted by the neurological damage, causing changes in rhythm, intonation, vowel quality, and consonant articulation that happen to pattern match, in listeners' perception, with the sound of a non-native accent. A person who has spoken with a regional English accent their entire life wakes from a stroke sounding, to everyone around them, as though they grew up somewhere else entirely. Fewer than 100 cases have been confirmed in the global medical literature. The condition is disorienting in ways that extend well beyond the physical. Patients frequently report profound psychological distress from suddenly sounding unrecognizable to people who have known them for decades. Identity is partly carried in the voice, and when the voice changes without permission, something fundamental about social selfhood is disrupted. Family members who have interacted with someone for 30 years suddenly find themselves, inexplicably, listening to a stranger. The world of ultra-rare disease also includes conditions whose mechanisms read less like medicine and more like science fiction. Consider fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, a condition in which the body's soft tissue repair mechanism malfunctions catastrophically, causing muscle, tendons, and ligaments to gradually turn to bone following injury or inflammation. The human body has a remarkable capacity to repair damaged tissue. In fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, this repair process is hijacked by a mutation in the ACVR1 gene, causing the body to treat soft tissue damage as though bone regeneration is the appropriate response. Over time, patients develop a second skeleton, sheets and bridges of bone that form outside the normal skeletal structure, progressively locking joints and immobilizing body parts. The condition is both extremely rare, affecting roughly 1 in 2 million people, and completely without effective treatment. Attempts to surgically remove the extra bone trigger further bone growth at the surgical site, making intervention actively counterproductive. The cruelty of fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva lies not just in its effects, but in its timeline. Children are born apparently healthy, though they frequently have a malformed big toe that serves as a diagnostic indicator. The condition progresses episodically, triggered by bumps, falls, injections, and infections. The normal physical events of a child's life become catalysts for progressive immobilization. Most people with the condition are significantly mobility restricted by early adulthood and severely limited by middle age. The body, in one of its most catastrophic misapplications of an otherwise useful function, builds a cage from the inside. Understanding why these conditions exist at all requires a brief detour into the mechanics of genetic mutation. The human genome contains approximately 3 billion base pairs, the chemical letters that encode our biological blueprint. Each time a cell divides and copies that genome, there is a small but non-zero probability of an error. Most errors are caught and corrected by sophisticated molecular proofreading machinery. Most that aren't caught are either harmless or lethal to the cell in question. But occasionally an error slips through that alters a protein in a way that disrupts some biological function. And depending on which protein, which function, and how severe the disruption, the result can range from no noticeable effect to a condition that affects every aspect of a person's existence. Ultra-rare diseases are frequently the result of mutations so unusual that they occur only a handful of times in the entire human population, either as spontaneous mutations arising newly in a single individual or as the rare intersection of two carrier parents passing a recessive mutation to a child. They represent, in a sense, the extreme tail of biological possibility. The vast, extraordinary range of ways the human body can be assembled, and the vast, extraordinary range of ways that assembly can go differently than expected. There is no meaningful sense in which the people who have these conditions did anything to cause them. They are the recipients of a particular arrangement of genetic circumstances, a cosmic lottery with consequences that range from minor to severe to devastating. And they navigate a medical world that was built, understandably, around the conditions that affect the most people, which means conditions affecting very few people often receive the least research funding, the least clinical expertise, the least infrastructure of support. This is why rare disease advocacy has become increasingly important over recent decades. Organizations like the National Organization for Rare Disorders in the United States, Rare Diseases Europe, and numerous condition-specific patient advocacy groups have pushed for regulatory frameworks, like the U.S. Orphan Drug Act of 1983, that create incentives for pharmaceutical companies to develop treatments for conditions that wouldn't otherwise be commercially viable targets. The results have been meaningful. Orphan drug designations have led to approved treatments for hundreds of conditions that would otherwise have none. Research networks connecting rare disease patients across countries have enabled studies that wouldn't be possible with single institution patient populations. Genetic sequencing technology has dramatically accelerated the diagnostic process. What once required years of inconclusive testing can sometimes now be resolved through whole genome sequencing in weeks. Patients who once spent a decade seeking a diagnosis are, in some cases, now receiving answers within months. But enormous gaps remain. For the rarest of the rare, conditions with confirmed patient populations in the single digits, even the improved regulatory environment provides limited traction. You cannot run a clinical trial with 2 patients. You cannot establish treatment efficacy with a sample size of 5. The medical infrastructure of evidence-based medicine, which works powerfully for common conditions, breaks down almost completely at the extreme end of rarity. What does all of this leave us with? What is, definitively, the rarest disease in the world? The honest answer is that the question may be unanswerable with precision, and for reasons that are themselves illuminating. Conditions like ribose 5-phosphate isomerase deficiency have so few confirmed cases that they contend plausibly for the title. But the contenders are numerous, and the case counts are so small and so dependent on detection rates that comparisons between them are epistemically treacherous. There are almost certainly conditions that have affected 1 or 2 people in recorded history and were never identified as distinct entities. There may be conditions affecting people alive right now that have never been identified, never been named, never been described in any medical literature. Conditions that exist in the world without a word attached to them. The rarest disease in the world might be one we haven't found yet. It might be affecting someone who is, right now, sitting in a doctor's office with a folder full of inconclusive test results, being told their case is interesting, waiting for the moment when someone finally walks in with an answer. That possibility, not hopeless, but unresolved, is perhaps the most important thing to carry out of this exploration. The frontier of human medical knowledge is not some distant abstraction. It is located in part in the bodies of real people whose conditions have not yet been named, understood, or treated. And the distance between where medicine stands today and where it needs to be is measured very concretely in the number of people still waiting for that answer. The rarest diseases are windows into the extraordinary complexity of human biology. They are reminders that the body, for all that medical science has mapped and cataloged and come to understand about it, is still capable of producing configurations that no one anticipated and no one yet knows how to address. And they are evidence above all that the people carrying these conditions deserve not just curiosity, though curiosity is a start, but resources, research, advocacy, and a medical world that treats the rarest among us as no less worthy of answers than the rest.